Right, so I think the discussion between Piers Morgan and Nick Fuentes last night was really important, very important moment in contemporary political discourse. And so I want to try to talk about it. So, of course, what Fuentes appearing on Piers Morgan Uncensored really indicates is that the alt-right has broken through and become mainstreamed. This is largely Fuentes' achievement. I don't think anybody else has really managed to break through in the way that he has. And the Liberals are very aware of this, and they're very scared. And for them to come out and engage with Fuentes is a very perilous and risky move, because what you've got to recognize is that ever since 17, a strategy was adopted of quarantine, right? Of containment, of just do not engage, leave them in their echo chambers, right? Don't let them have any influence. Simply act as though they didn't exist. Pretend they're not there, and maybe they'll go away, right? Maybe we'll starve them of oxygen, and they will just go away. And the fact that Fuentes has broken through, especially this year, really has demonstrated that that strategy has failed. So what we're talking about, I'm just going to use the word alt-right. I know it's not generally used by people on the alt-right anymore, but I don't know why. I'm just going to use the expression. So that ideology that is breaking through and which Fuentes is representing is an ideology of race realism, of ethno-nationalism, of criticism of the role that Jews often tend to play in Western societies. And it also involves an advocacy of paternalism, right? A defense of patriarchy. So it is a challenge to liberalism in its essence, okay? It's a challenge to liberalism in its totality. It is a real, head-on challenge to liberalism as a political ideology, and therefore to liberal democracy as a political system. And of course, we see Fuentes talking about how he admires people that we usually describe as dictators, right? Hitler and Stalin. So we're potentially looking at, a defense of authoritarianism as well, right? Although that hasn't really come to the fore so much as those other themes have. So the point is that this is a real head-on challenge to liberalism. And so liberalism tried to respond to that head-on challenge, which the alt-right represented, for many years by just pretending it wasn't there. Just don't give it oxygen, quarantine it, marginalize it. And so bringing Fuentes onto Piers Morgan is kind of a confession that that strategy has failed. The alt-right has still broken through in spite of all that, right? In spite of that whole strategy, which is still deepening itself as we speak, because they're afraid, they are scared, right? So algorithmic censorship, right, to which this video will be subject. Just a suppression of dissident content, right? The deplatformings, you remember, from 17. Jared Taylor was not allowed on Twitter for years because he had too much influence, right? He had too much of an impact to be tolerable, and lots of other very prominent people were deplatformed in that period too. Just outright censorship. Flooding social media with manufactured influencers. This is something that really picked up through the Biden years, right? You've got loads of DNC promoted influencers, and no doubt there are similar things on the British side as well. But a hell of a lot of DNC created, manufactured, promoted influencers, flooded, right, to try to combat the influence of the online right, because it was the online right that got Trump elected, right? So they are afraid. This is what this discussion was really all about. It was really all about the fact that the alt-right has not remained marginalized, has not remained suppressed, is breaking through, especially in the person of Fuentes. Liberalism is challenged. Liberalism is afraid. The containment policy might not be tenable. And so they are coming out and risking a direct engagement, something that they have tried to avoid for years. Okay, now, of course, I didn't even go through all of the planks of that strategy of containment. We have also seen the Online Safety Act, right? behind the Online Safety Act is, it was promoted, of course, it was marketed as about defending kids, but really it was about suppressing online dissidents, because online dissidents is terrifying for them. The success of online dissidents since 2016 is terrifying for the establishment. And of course, it involves state pressure on social media companies to censor, right? State pressure on social media companies from the state to do their censoring for them. Otherwise, we will fine you. We will inflict crushing fines on you, right? So the state is censoring us. It's just doing so indirectly and dishonestly, okay? And it has to censor us because it's afraid, because the alt-right is breaking through and winning. So after years of adopting the do not engage strategy, the quarantine strategy, liberalism is being forced to return to engagement. It's a perilous strategy. They have decided that there is a need for liberal ideological pushback. Now, the first attempt at that, right, recently led to a backfire. It was Carlson. Carlson interviewed Fuentes, right? Carlson called Fuentes a gay kid in his basement, and Fuentes responded with fire and fury, which blew him up. Massively successful response. Carlson was aware that he had fucked up very seriously, and he needed to backpedal. And so he invited Fuentes on to try to, do some damage limitation. That's what that was. And Fuentes came out of that exchange bigger, right? And so the liberal establishment is afraid. And so Morgan has decided that he can do better. That there's a need to do better, that there's an imperative need for liberal pushback against the rise of Fuentes, right? So, yes, it is an important moment. There's a whole research team devoting huge resources to subject Fuentes to grilling, right? Attempting to ridicule him, using polemical and fallacious strategies in order to make him look unappealing to the centre, to people who might be susceptible to his message, to put him on the spot, poke holes in him, and so on. That's how much it means to them. That's how important they recognise that this is. Morgan is confident because he does have massive resources, right? Lots of strategic planning, loads of resources have been poured into this attempt to take Fuentes down, or at least to undermine Fuentes, right? He has far more resources than Fuentes, of course. Far more strategic planning went into the interrogation and the grilling of Fuentes than Fuentes was able to put into his response, right? And again, Fuentes is the one on the back foot. He's the one put on the spot. He's the one who has to do the responding, right? He doesn't know necessarily what he's going to be asked. So, a lot of resources was poured into trying to make this effective for liberalism. But yeah, it's about polemics, right? It isn't about the facts and logic. This is a polemical, ideological confrontation. It's the midwits they have to persuade, right? It's not the committed alt-right. It's not the committed leftists. It's the centre, right, that they have to persuade. It's 110 IQ people, 115 IQ people, right? People who are somewhat engaged in politics, but they're not committed, right? They're not committed in a clear-sighted and conscious way. So given that it is the midwits that you need to reach, it isn't going to be a scientific or a logico-scientific endeavor. It's going to be a polemical engagement, right? And that's what we saw. Now, let's talk about some of the arguments that did come up then. One of them was that Nick's parents are immigrants, and therefore Nick isn't in a position to criticize immigration. This is supposed to be a contradiction. Clearly, it isn't, right? But really, it was supposed to. It was a way of forcing Nick to come out as a racist, right? It was a way of forcing Nick to come out and say, yeah, my ancestors were immigrants, but they were white. Whereas the immigrants that we actually have a problem with are the immigrants who are not white. And Nick did say that. He did say, I am a racist. And this is a very important and central point. The idea from the liberal point of view is that this is automatically, a W, right? Just to make him say that he's a racist is a W. But of course, from the alt-right point of view, the point is precisely to normalize racism. Racism is something that has been used to guilt trip white people and make them, submit and succumb to liberalism for decades. And so the most crucial polemical move for white people is to pull off the one that Nick is trying to pull off. Say, yes, I'm a racist, fuck you. What are you going to do about it, right? And so Nick did come out and say, I am a racist. Very crucial point. I'll return to it a bit below. Then another argument that came up was the white school shooter fallacy, right? Very weak boomer nonsense, I have put in the notes. So, I mean, for goodness sake, the fact that most school shooters are white is a drop in the ocean compared to black crime, both black on black crime and black on white crime, just, the amount of crime that black people commit, right? So it really isn't a phenomenon on the same level. But what is interesting is that it does show up real race differences on violence, which actually is evidence in favor of of race realism, right? Because you see that these essentially different groups tend to commit essentially different sorts of violence. So you can look at it that way too. Now, here's the most important thing. This is the central thing that came out of the whole interview. Morgan lied. He gave you bad statistics. And that is extremely important and extremely telling. He said that the violent crime rates between whites and blacks are about the same. This is just a lie. So this really shows up the fact that the facts are on our side. Liberals have to resort to lies and to denial. Yeah, so here are some statistics that you can actually rely on a bit better. These are from Facing Reality, which is Charles Murray's book from 2021. Charles Murray is universally recognized as being an eminent social statistician. He is far more than merely competent, okay? And these are the stats that he gives us. Arrest rates for murder in 13 cities. These are ratios, but he's only giving the numerator, right? If you want to look at this, you can. This is where he explains the tables. So you can screenshot that or whatever if you need to. He explains that he's only giving the numerator such that the rate in New York City is 18.1 black murder arrests for every one white murder arrest, right? So the denominator is always 1. Okay, so in New York it's 18.1 to 1. In LA it's 20 to 1. In Chicago it's 22 to 1. That's where Fuentes is from, of course. In DC, I mean, how shocking is that bloody number? It's 85 to 1 in DC. And so on. The mean weighted by population for all of these cities is 21 black arrests for murder to 1 white arrest for murder. Here's the more general violent crime arrests. New York, it's 11.6 to 1. LA, it's 9 to 1. Chicago, it's 14.5 to 1. DC, it's 20 to 1. And so on, right? The mean weighted by population for all those cities is 11.2 to 1, okay? These figures are not very close. They're very far from being very close, okay? So the fact is that the Liberals have to resort to denial and lies in order to sustain their position. That is the position that liberalism has come to. It cannot sustain itself, as we have already discussed, without censorship, without literally suppressing the voices of non-liberals. And they also have to resort to denial about race realism, and they have to resort to lies about it. Okay? It's very crucial to understand this point. So what we're talking about here is that race differences, and this is how we should define racism, right? When Fuentes comes out and says, I'm a racist, what does he mean? This is what he means. He means that this is what defines race realism, right? Race differences are real, they are substantial, or large, they are very significantly heritable, which is an absolutely crucial point, and they are very socially impactful, right? So your society doesn't stay the same if you replace it with if you take white people and replace them with black or brown people. You make your society objectively worse by doing that. Okay. White societies and non-white societies, therefore, are essentially different because race is real. Okay. So white people and black people give rise to very different kinds of societies. Okay. You only have to look at black communities and at black societies elsewhere in the world. So if you import the third world, you are going to become the third world. Okay, it's vital to recognize that. These characteristics like propensity to violence, IQ, conscientiousness, and so on are all very significantly heritable. They're not just like cultural things. They're not effects of racism. They are heritable. They are essential race differences, right? Because race is real. So there is an immoral gaslighting of white people in which Piers Morgan is participating, right? We're being told that we're responsible for the crimes of other groups, for the violence of other groups, right? Because their violence is just a response to our racism. I mean, this is immoral, and it is also false because there's no question that all of those cognitive and behavioral traits are very significantly heritable. There is no escaping from that bottom line. So yeah, there's an immoral turning of a blind eye to the reality of race going on here, right? And it is immoral because, for God's sake, you can't understand the grooming gang phenomenon, the boat people crime phenomenon, gang crime phenomenon. You can't understand any of these things without facing up to the reality of race, right? Higher rates of violent crime are being inflicted on our people by other groups, and liberals are in an immoral way turning a blind eye to that fact, right? It's smug boomer denial, right? The infliction of this crime on our people is an effect of this smug boomer liberal denial, and it is immoral. Another stupid argument that came up was to the effect that Nick is not white, right? Because his father was Mexican. Obviously, his father was principally white Mexican, right? Although, no doubt he had some Amerindian admixture. So maybe Nick is 5% or 10% Amerindian, right? Because even white Mexicans have some heritage from Amerindians. Does this mean he's not white? Obviously not. Let me remind you of the Nuremberg laws. You had to have 3 white grandparents to qualify as Deutschblutig, or white, under the Nuremberg laws. So you had to be 75% white, let's say, right? So you could be 25% non-white and still qualify as white under historical National Socialism, okay? And obviously, I mean, for God's sake, you only have to look at Nick to see that he's white, for goodness sake. He actually looks more Irish than anything else. I think he said that on one of his shows at some point. More bad arguments and fallacies. Yeah, the appeal to emotion. Morgan drags on some old Jew who says boo-hoo, right? The Holocaust, therefore, is being used on Piers Morgan uncensored as ideology against white ethnocentrism, right? Because, again, what Nick is representing on that show is white ethnocentrism, right? So when you bring on the old Jew and make him, cry out as he strikes you, they are using the Holocaust as ideology against the rise of white ethnocentrism. The argument is that if we adopt ethnocentrism, then it leads straight to Auschwitz. This is clearly what is being done. This is clearly the bad argument that's being made, although Morgan just denies it, right? But the fact is that we have to get over these old guilt-tripping tactics and assert ourselves if we are going to save our race and our societies. Right? Because if we don't get over those old tactics and confront the reality of race, our societies are going to become third world societies. You really have to face this and harden your heart a bit. I don't deny the Holocaust or apologize for it, but we have to stop allowing it to be used against us. We need to put ourselves first in the world at this point, and that means adopting a white racial consciousness, and it means insisting that our societies are staying white. Okay, the alternative to that is allowing them to become third world societies. We simply can't do that. Then, of course, more bad arguments. There's the mockery over tampons, right? And the mockery of Nick for being an incel. Nick's never seen a tampon, right? Because he's a virgin at the age of 27. Well, he has a Christian commitment to celibacy. Is this a problem? It is a threatening problem, isn't it? I would like to say that, Nick's private life, his sexuality are just none of our business. He's making a commitment to celibacy, at least for the time being, is a perfectly legitimate choice. I am somewhat concerned that it might blow up in the future, though, right? This is the threatening danger, unfortunately. It's quite possible that Nick might be gay. That wouldn't change my attitude towards him. But unfortunately, Nick's base is composed of Christian Americans, right? And so it could be a problem for his base. Maybe coming out as gay would be Nick exploding out of his base, right, and gaining a larger base. I don't know, but it's not going to happen because Christianity is such an important part of Nick's identity, and celibacy seems to be a choice that he has committed himself to. He's entitled to do that, but is it sustainable? It's genuinely a worrying problem. So Morgan asked Nick outright if he's gay. Nick responded no. But, there was a big pause. After he was asked the question, Nick's eyes went up. He then said no, and then his eyes flicked to the right. That response made me a little uncomfortable. I personally suspect that Nick might be gay. Of course, I don't know. And I'm concerned that might be a problem in the future, at least with respect to Nick's relationship to his base, if nothing else. So in a sense, it's possible that Nick might have painted himself into a corner, right? Because he can't come out as gay for his base. He can. He could come out as gay and say, "I'm nonetheless committed to celibacy because I consider homosexuality sinful." His base could accept that because we all have a cross to bear, right? But if he was to come out as gay and say, "Look, I'm going to have relationships because I'm a human being over here. I can't live with celibacy," although that would be very, very human, it would possibly have negative implications with respect to his relationship to his base because, well, American Christians tend to be homophobic, right? So it is a threatening problem, and it is one that is concerning. Could that be what brings him down? I don't think so. I think he's too big now. But it's a threatening problem. Morgan also asked Nick outright, is he attracted to women? And Nick's response to that did not have the same uncomfortable body language, or that was my impression, at any rate. So if Nick was able to answer, yes, I'm attracted to women, honestly, well, I suspect that what that means is that he has a strong preference in favour of men, but there are some women to whom he's able to be attracted. That's my personal suspicion. Again, it shouldn't matter, but unfortunately this is politics, and it does, right? It's not about facts and logic, it's about polemics. It's about, ideological confrontation. So unfortunately it does matter. So it's not a question that we can ignore, even if we would rather ignore it. But yeah, the mockery over tampons and incels is just crude ad hominem nonsense, honestly. But again, potentially effective because it's the midwits that you've got to convince. So in conclusion, Morgan's arguments were weak, boomer, fallacious crap. And ultimately we win because we're right and the facts are on our side, right? And so that's why I think that Morgan's bringing out of distorted or twisted or just outright false statistics about the race and crime issue, that was the most important and telling moment of the discussion for me.